Welcome to Midnight Ember Studios. They say every soul has a price. Mine was exactly $14. That's all I have left when I stood on the edge of the Mapo Bridge, ready to jump. But before the water could take me, a hand like iron pulled me back. It belonged to Kang Min-ho, the wealthiest, most dangerous mafia boss in all of Korea. He didn't save me out of mercy. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Your brain is worth 1 billion won, doctor. You aren't allowed to die until you save the only person I love." I thought he was my savior. I didn't realize he was actually my new owner. I was the top neurosurgeon in Seoul until they framed me, stole my research, and left me for dead. But as I prepared to take my final breath over the Han River, the ghost appeared. Kang Min-ho, the man the police are too afraid to even name, didn't just stop my suicide, he started a war. He gave me a lab, a penthouse fortress, and a blood-stained scalpel. But what happened when I finally opened his secret files? It didn't just shock the medical board, it changed the history of the Korean underworld forever. Most people fear the dark. I used to be one of them until the dark saved my life. Meet Dr. Ama Serwa Menza. 2 days ago, she was a disgraced surgeon with $14 to her name. Today, she is a personal consigliere to Korea's most violent billionaire. He rescued her from the ledge of a bridge only to put a gun in her hand and a dying girl on her operating table. But the twist, the man who ruined Ama's life is the same man the mafia boss calls father. Now the doctor has to decide, does she heal the sick or does she cut out the cancer that shares her lover's blood? The transition from the freezing mists of the Mapo Bridge to the suffocating luxury of the Lotte World Tower penthouse was a blur of black leather upholstery and the silent, high-speed hum of an elevator. When the doors finally slid open at the summit of Seoul, Ama didn't feel like a rescued woman. She felt like a specimen being moved from one jar to another. She woke on a bed draped in charcoal gray silk, the fabric so smooth it felt invasive against her skin. The room was a masterpiece of monochromatic coldness, floor-to-ceiling glass, marble floors that reflected the city lights like a frozen lake, and air that tasted of expensive filtration in cedarwood. Ama bolted upright, her hand instinctively flying to her neck. The gold cuffs in her braids jingled softly, a fragile sound in the heavy silence. Her designer glasses were folded neatly on a nightstand made of obsidian. The sedative was a necessity, a voice rumbled from the shadows. You were hyperventilating. A surgeon's heart should be steady. Kang Min-ho sat in a high-backed velvet chair by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had removed his suit jacket, revealing a tailored black waistcoat that emphasized his lean, athletic build. The faint scar on his temple seemed to pulse under the dim, recessed lighting. "Where is my phone?" Ama demanded, her voice cracking but retaining its regal edge. She swung her legs off the bed, her feet hitting the heated marble. "You can't just keep me here. This is kidnapping." Min-ho didn't look at her. He stared out at the sprawling sprawl of Seoul below, his sharp jawline set in a grim line. "Kidnapping is taking someone from a place they want to be. You were on a bridge, doctor. I simply changed your destination." He stood up, his movements possessing a predatory stillness that made the cavernous room feel suddenly microscopic. He walked to the nightstand and tossed a thin, translucent tablet onto the silk duvet. "Look at the first file," he commanded. Ama picked it up, her eyes widened. It was a wire transfer confirmation from a private Swiss account. The recipient? St. Jude's Cardiac Clinic, Accra, Ghana. The amount? $250,000. "That's my mother's debt," Ama whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The mortgage on the clinic, the equipment liens. How?" "I don't just buy people, Dr. Mensa. I clear the wreckage of their past so they can focus on my future," Min-ho said, stopping just inches from her. He was 6'1", towering over her, his fair skin contrasting sharply with the deep, glowing bronze of her own. But let be clear, he whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. The money wasn't a gift. It was a down payment. You belong to the ghost now, and in this fortress there is only one rule. Save my sister, or I make sure the next wire transfer to Ghana is for a funeral. Amma stared at the tablet, the glowing screen reflecting in her almond-shaped eyes. She was no longer a doctor in white scrubs. She was a golden bird in a cage of obsidian. "Show me the patient," she said, her voice finally steadying into the clinical armor she knew best. Minho's lips curved into a thin ghost of a smile. "Follow me." The hallway of the Lotte penthouse was a silent, pressurized vault. The air felt thinner here, scrubbed clean by medical-grade filters. Minho led the way, his stride measured and hauntingly quiet until they reached a heavy, reinforced door at the end of the east wing. He pressed his palm against a biometric scanner. With a pressurized hiss, the door retracted, revealing a room that felt like a jarring fracture in the Mafia Boss's monochromatic world. It was an ICU suite, but one disguised as a sanctuary. Soft lavender silk draped the walls, and a collection of hand-carved Ghanaian wooden figures sat on a bookshelf, strange, earthy relics against the gleaming chrome of a ventilator and a multi-parameter monitor. In the center of it all lay a young woman, perhaps 19, whose skin was the color of parched parchment. Her features mirrored Minho's sharp beauty, but they were hollowed out by a terrifying, wasting sickness. "This is Yuna," Minho said. The predatory edge in his voice had vanished, replaced by a raw, jagged grief that made him human for the first time. Amma moved instinctively. The doctor in her took over, a reflex that even the Mapo bridge couldn't kill. She didn't wait for permission. She checked the monitor. Heart rate was tachycardic. Intracranial pressure was spiking in a rhythmic, ominous wave. She lifted Yuna's eyelid, shining a small penlight she pulled from her pocket. The pupil was sluggish, swimming in a sea of neurological fog. "She's hemorrhaging," Amma whispered, her fingers flying over her pulse point. Slowly, methodically. "This isn't a natural trauma, Minho. This is a neurotoxin," Minho finished, his shadow falling over the bed. "Developed by the same research lab that stole your papers. Director Choi didn't just want your glory, Dr. Mensah. He wanted a weapon he could sell to my rivals to dismantle the Korean Syndicate from the inside. He used Yuna as his first clinical trial." Amma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's climate control. "He used my research to kill a child?" "He used a corrupted version of it," Minho corrected. He walked to the bedside and picked up a rare, leather-bound collection of Ghanaian folktales. "I know you spent your nights in the hospital library reading these when you were lonely. I brought them here for her. I thought she would hear the stories of your home, and she might find the strength to stay until I found you." He held the book out to her. It was a gesture of profound, silent vulnerability. For a second, the master of shadows disappeared, leaving only a desperate brother standing before a disgraced healer. Amma realized then that the wealthiest man in Korea was just as much a prisoner as she was, chained to a hospital bed by a love he couldn't protect with a gun. "The research he stole, it was designed to knit neural pathways back together," Amma said, her regal presence returning as she straightened her back, her box braids swaying with a metallic jingle. "But if he reversed the protein sequence, it wouldn't heal. It would dissolve the brain's ability to regulate the heart." "Can you fix it?" Minho's dark eyes were predatory again, but this time they were pleading. Amma looked at Yuna's frail form, the porcelain sister who was breaking in real time. "I need my original notes, not the scrubbed versions Choi published. I need the raw data he deleted from my laptop." Minho reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold-plated flash drive. "I didn't just pay your mother's debts, Amma. I sent my men to Choi's private residence an hour after I pulled you off the bridge." He pressed the drive into her hand, his skin warm and calloused against hers. Everything he took is here, Amma. Now, tell me what you need to save her." Amma gripped the drive, her exhaustion replaced by a cold, sharp fire. "I need a surgical team I can trust, a sterile field, and enough propofol to put a lion to sleep. And Minho?" He paused at the door, the silver signet on his temple catching the light. "Yes?" "If I'm going to do this, I do it my way. No mafia interference, no guns in the OR. Minho's jaw tightened, the gold signet on his pinky glinting. "The guns stay outside the door, Doctor, but they will be loaded. Don't fail her." As the door hissed shut, leaving Amma alone with the humming machines, she realized she wasn't just fighting for Yuna's life. She was fighting for her own. For the first time in months, she didn't want to die. She wanted to win. The alarm didn't sound like a hospital chime. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency pulse that vibrated through the floorboards of the lab. Amma looked up from the glowing blue sequence of the neural protein. Her eyes were bloodshot behind her designer glasses, her waist-length braids pulled back into a severe, practical knot. The door hissed open. Minho stood there, but the bespoke CEO persona was gone. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar and stained with a jagged spray of arterial red. Behind him, two men carried a third, a soldier in tactical gear, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. "The theater isn't ready for Yuna yet," Minho said, his voice a calm, terrifying contrast to the chaos. "But Jinsu won't make it to the morning. A splinter cell from the Korean Syndicate hit our convoy, shrapnel in the T4 vertebrae." Alma stood, her regal presence hardening into a clinical chill. "I am a neurosurgeon, Minho, not a field medic." "Tonight, you are whatever I need you to be," he countered, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He reached into a cabinet and tossed a bundle of fabric at her. It wasn't the pristine white of her former life. It was a set of heavy, tactical scrubs, deep, midnight black. Amma caught them. The weight of the fabric felt like armor. She retreated to the scrub room, stripping away the remnants of her victim self and pulling on the black uniform. When she stepped into the operating suite, she didn't look like a disgraced doctor. She looked like a shadow. The soldier, Jinsu, was pale, his chocolate-toned skin turning a sickly gray. Blood pooled on the stainless steel table, dripping onto the floor with a steady tap, tap, tap. A month ago, the sight of such raw, senseless violence would have made Amma's stomach turn. She would have thought of malpractice suits and ethics boards. But as she snapped on her latex gloves, she felt a strange, cold electricity. In this room, there were no boards, no Director Choi to steal her credit. There was only the blade, the patient, and the man with the silver scar watching her from the observation glass. "Scalpel," Amma commanded. Her voice didn't tremble. She worked for 4 hours. The shrapnel was wedged against the spinal cord like a serrated tooth. 1 millimeter of deviance would paralyze the man forever. Outside the reinforced glass, she could hear the muffled thuds of distant gunfire. The syndicate was under siege, but inside the sterile bubble, Amma was God. She didn't just remove the metal. She used a syringe of her newly stabilized ethyl red protein to coat the damaged nerve endings. She watched through the microscope as the fibers began to knit together in real time, fueled by the very research Choi had tried to turn into a weapon. As she placed the final suture, she stepped back. Her black scrubs were splattered with dark crimson. She looked at her hands. They were rock steady. She looked up at the glass. Minho was standing there, his hand pressed against the pane, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Amma didn't see a kidnapper. She saw a partner. She realized then that the blood didn't terrify her anymore. It empowered her. In the white world, she was a target. In the black world, her brilliance was the only thing standing between life and death. "He'll walk by Tuesday," Amma said into the intercom, her voice echoing with a new, dangerous authority. "Clean up," Minho's voice crackled back, thick with an unfamiliar pride. "The war has just started, Doctor, and I think you're my best soldier." The transition from the blood-stained black scrubs of the underground OR to the high-fashion armory of the penthouse was a silent, jarring metamorphosis. Amma stood before a triptych of mirrors, her chocolate-toned skin glowing against a gown that wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration of war. The dress was a custom-tailored masterpiece in emerald silk, featuring a high, regal neckline and a floor-length cape that trailed behind her like a shadow. Woven into the hem were delicate threads of Ghanaian gold, a subtle nod to her heritage that Min-ho had insisted upon. Her box braids were gathered into an intricate crown, pinned with obsidian daggers that shimmered under the chandelier light. "The glasses stay," Min-ho said, stepping into the reflection behind her. He was back in his element, a three-piece tuxedo of such deep black it seemed to drink the light of the room. He reached out, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her jaw before adjusting the thick-rimmed designer frames on the bridge of her nose. "They remind them that you can see through their lies before you even pick up a scalpel," he whispered. "This is a mistake," Amma murmured, though her reflection told a different story. "Chairman Park owns the medical board. He owns the police. Walking in there is like walking into a cage of lions." Min-ho's predatory eyes met hers in the mirror. He leaned down, his lips inches from her ear. "Lions only hunt what they think is prey, Amma. Tonight, you are the one holding the leash. You aren't just a doctor anymore, Amma. You are my consigliere, my advisor, my spine." The Grand Hyatt ballroom was a sea of clean evil, men in white ties and women in diamonds, all sipping champagne bought with the interest on human suffering. At the center of the room stood Chairman Park, a man whose smile was as polished and artificial as a prosthetic limb. The room went silent when the doors opened. It wasn't just the height of the Ghanaian doctor and the striking contrast of her emerald gown against the monochromatic crowd. It was the way she walked, with a measured, clinical grace that made the marble floor feel like a stage. And beside her, the ghost. "Chairman Park," Min-ho's voice carried through the sudden vacuum of sound, cold and rhythmic. "I believe you remember Dr. Amma Surawa Mensah. You spent quite a lot of energy trying to convince the world she didn't exist." Park's smile didn't falter, but his eyes, small and greedy, flickered with a momentary terror. "Min-ho, I heard you had taken interest in charity cases. I didn't realize you were bringing the help to the Bala." Amma stepped forward, her regal presence expanding until she seemed to dwarf the chairman. She didn't look at his face, she looked at his hands, the way a surgeon looks at a tremor. "Charity," Amma's voice was a rich, dark velvet that commanded the room. "Is that what you call the $40 million you've already made from the pre-orders for Project Ethelred? Or is that what you call the malpractice suit you forged to cover the fact that you can't actually stabilize the protein chain without me?" A ripple of hushed whispers broke out. Park's face paled. "You're delusional. That research is proprietary property of—" "It's a death sentence," Amma interrupted, her almond-shaped eyes flashing with a dangerous brilliance. "I've seen what your proprietary version does, Park. I've spent the last 48 hours fixing the rot you put into the world. You didn't steal a cure, you stole a ticking bomb." Min-ho stepped up behind her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The gold signet ring on his pinky caught the light, a silent reminder of the violence backing her words. "My consigliere has a very specific set of demands, Chairman, and unlike the medical board, I don't require a vote to enforce them." Amma watched the sweat break on Park's brow. For the first time since she had stood on the Mapo Bridge, she didn't feel the weight of the water. She felt the weight of her power. She wasn't just reclaiming her dignity, she was taking his breath away. "Enjoy the champagne, Chairman. It's the last thing you'll ever taste that isn't ash." As they turned to walk away, the crowd parting like the Red Sea, Amma felt Min-ho's grip tighten slightly. "Well done, doctor. The lions are starving. Let's go give them something to chew on." The silence of the Lotte Tower medical wing was usually rhythmic, the hum of the ventilator, the steady beep-beep of the vitals monitor. But as Amma sat by Yuna's bedside, her eyes tracking the jagged lines of the EEG, she felt a shift in the air. It was a clinical instinct, the kind that made her a prodigy, the sense that a patient's environment had been compromised before the symptoms even appeared. A young nurse, Ji-hoon, entered the room. He was one of the few vetted staff Min-ho allowed in the inner sanctum. He carried a tray of fresh IV saline bags, his movements efficient and quiet. "Dr. Mensah?" he whispered, bowing slightly. "The midnight rotation. I'm here to swap the antibiotic drip." Amma didn't look up from her tablet, but her eyes narrowed behind her designer glasses. "The protocol was for the 2 a.m. shift, Ji-hoon. You're early." "Shift lead changed the schedule, doctor. High security tonight," he replied, reaching for the IV stand. Her gaze drifted to his hands. They were steady, encased in latex, but as he reached for the port, a glint of light caught the edge of his tray. It wasn't a standard needle. It was a surgical scalpel, tucked beneath a gauze pad, its edge coated in a dull yellowish film. "Stop," Amma said. The word was a scalpel itself, sharp and cold. Ji-hoon froze. "Doctor." "Look at your tremors," Amma remarked, standing up with a regal, terrifying slowness. She stepped into his personal space, her 5'9" frame casting a shadow over him. "In the cafeteria yesterday, you held your coffee cup with your left hand, you're left-handed, but you're reaching for that port with your right hand, and your radial pulse, I can see it jumping in your neck from here." "Tachycardic, about 110 beats per minute." "I'm just tired, Dr. Mensah," he stammered, backing away. "No," Amma countered, her almond-shaped eyes locking onto his. "You're symptomatic of guilt, and that scalpel on your tray, the discoloration on the blade isn't oxidation. It's a concentrated dose of potassium chloride mixed with a neural inhibitor. One scratch on Yuna's skin and her heart stops in 4 seconds. No trace in a standard tox screen." Ji-hoon's face drained of color, his nursing mask crumbling. He lunged for the bed, the poisoned blade raised, but he never reached the silk sheets. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward. Min-ho was there in a heartbeat, his movement a blur of monochromatic violence. He caught the nurse's wrist mid-air, the sound of bones snapping echoing like a dry twig. The scalpel clattered to the marble floor. Min-ho didn't use a gun. He slammed the mole against the wall, his hand crushing the man's throat, the gold signet ring pressing into his skin. The ghost looked less like a man and more like a starving wolf. "Who sent you?" Min-ho's voice was a low, vibrating growl that made the glass partitions rattle. "Min-ho, don't," Amma said, her voice steady and commanding. She walked over and picked up the scalpel with a pair of forceps, holding it up to the light. "He's just a delivery boy. Look at the puncture marks on his inner arm. He's an addict. Chairman Park didn't buy his loyalty, he bought his desperation." Ji-hoon's face drained of color, his nursing mask crumbling. He lunged for the bed, the poisoned blade raised, but he never reached the silk sheets. Min-ho looked from the trembling mole to Amma, his dark, piercing eyes softened with a flicker of genuine shock. His guards, men trained in elite warfare, had missed the scalpel, they missed the tremor, they missed the threat right in front of them. "You saw it," Min-ho murmured, his grip loosening just enough for the man to gasp for air. "My best security didn't see a thing." "They look for guns and bombs, Min-ho," Amma said, her chocolate-toned skin glowing under the harsh fluorescent surgical lights. She looked down at the mole with a mix of pity and clinical coldness. "I'm a doctor. I diagnose anomalies." Min-ho signaled to his guards, who dragged the sobbing man away into the shadows of the hallway. He turned back to Amma, the silver scar on his temple white with adrenaline. He didn't move toward her. He stood in the center of the room, looking at her as if she were the only real thing in a world of ghosts. "You saved her again," he said quietly. "I saved us," Amma corrected, adjusting her glasses. "Because if she dies, Choi wins, and I've decided I don't like losing." Minho stepped closer, his presence no longer threatening, but intoxicatingly close. "You aren't just a surgeon anymore, Amma. You're the smartest weapon I've ever owned." "I'm not a weapon, Minho," she whispered, her gaze meeting his predatory one without flinching. "I'm the one who decides who lives. Remember that." The penthouse didn't scream. It groaned. A low-frequency vibration rattled the surgical trays in Amma's lab, followed by the muffled thwip, thwip, thwip of suppressed submachine guns. The lights flickered, shifting from clinical white to a blood-red emergency pulse. "Chairman Park doesn't wait for invitations," Amma whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She lunged for Yuna's bed, shielding the girl's frail body with her own just as the floor-to-ceiling glass of the observation deck shattered. Shards of diamond-hard glass rained down like winter hail. Through the dust, she saw them, black-clad mercenaries, their movements surgical and cold, descending from the roof. The door to the medical wing burst open. Minho roared into the room, his charcoal suit jacket gone, his white silk shirt unbuttoned and fluttering like a battle flag. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a god of war. In each hand, he held a sleek black handgun, his movements a blur of calculated monochromatic violence. Pop, 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 pop. He dropped 2 mercenaries before they could clear their holsters. He moved with a stillness that was unnerving, a predator defending his den. But Chairman Park's men were legion. A flashbang detonated in the hallway, white light blinding Amma for an agonizing second. When her vision cleared, Minho was slumped against the reinforced steel of the doorframe. A dark, spreading stain was blooming across the left side of his chest, soaking through the expensive silk. "Minho!" Amma screamed, scrambling across the marble floor. He stayed upright through sheer, terrifying will, his dark eyes glazed but fixed on the remaining intruders. He emptied his magazine into the hallway, the sound deafening in the small room, before the sliding door hissed shut and locked, a final mechanical act of protection. He collapsed into Amma's arms. He was 6'1" of solid muscle and refined intensity, and his weight nearly crushed her. "Save Yuna," he wheezed, his pale skin turning a translucent, ghostly gray. The gold signet ring on his pinky was slick with his own blood. "I'm saving both of you," Amma hissed, her regal grace hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she dragged him onto the spare operating table. She didn't look at the door where the mercenaries were already beginning to burn through the lock with a thermite torch. She didn't look at the flickering monitors. She looked only at the wound. The bullet had entered the subclavian artery. He was bleeding out in real time. "Scalpel," she commanded herself, her hands moving with a speed that bypassed thought. She didn't have an anesthesiologist. She didn't have a nurse. She ripped open his shirt, the silver scar on his temples standing out in stark relief against his sweating skin. She reached into the cavity, her fingers, the ones he had called property, clamping down on the spurting vessel. The smell of copper and cedarwood filled her lungs. Outside, the screech of the thermite grew louder. "Look at me, Minho," she commanded, leaning over him, her chocolate-toned skin glowing under the red emergency lights. "You told me I was your smartest weapon. Now, stay awake and watch me use it." His eyes flickered open, dark and predatory, even in the face of death. He watched her work, watched the woman he had pulled from a bridge weave his life back together with silk thread and sheer defiance. As the door began to glow red from the heat of the torch, Amma tied the final suture. The bleeding stopped. Minho's pulse stabilized under her palm. She grabbed a discarded handgun from the floor and stood between the door and her patients, her emerald gown stained with the blood of a king. "Come and get us," she whispered to the shadows. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the ghost's heart, and she was armed. The aftermath of the siege left the penthouse in a state of haunting, broken beauty. Shattered crystal littered the marble floors like fallen stars, and the smell of ozone and gunpowder lingered in the vents. Outside, the Seoul skyline remained indifferent, but inside, the world had shifted on its axis. Min-ho lay in the recovery suite, his chest heavily bandaged under a black silk robe. He was pale, the silver scar on his temple standing out against his skin, but his eyes, dark and predatory, never left Amma as she moved through the room. She had discarded her blood-stained emerald gown for a simple, oversized black shirt, her box braids falling loose over her shoulders. She was checking his vitals, her fingers lingering on his wrist a second longer than medically necessary. The steady rhythm of his heart beneath her touch felt like a miracle she had authored. "You should be sleeping," Amma whispered, her voice a rich, tired velvet. "The anesthesia hasn't fully cleared." Min-ho reached out, his hand, warm and calloused, anchoring her wrist. He pulled her closer until she was forced to sit on the edge of the silk-draped bed. The tension between them was no longer just the friction of a captor and a prisoner. It was the gravity of two dying stars collapsing into each other. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who want me dead," Min-ho rasped, his voice a low vibration that thrummed in Amma's chest. "But I have never seen anyone fight for my life the way you did tonight. Why, Amma? You could have let the bleeding continue. You could have walked out that door a free woman." Amma looked down at their joined hands, the deep bronze of her skin against his startlingly fair palm. She adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, her regal grace softening into something raw and honest. "Because the world on the other side of that door tried to kill me too. At that bridge, I was a ghost. Here, with you, I'm a queen, even if the throne is made of shadows." Min-ho didn't respond with words. He sat up, ignoring the sharp wince of his healing wound, and cupped her face. His thumb traced the line of her high cheekbones, lingering on the curve of her lips. When he kissed her, it wasn't a gentle thing. It was a desperate, scorched earth claim. It tasted of copper, cedarwood, and a fierce, mutual survival. In the quiet of the midnight hour, the clinical barriers finally dissolved. The rigid doctor and the volatile boss disappeared, replaced by two broken people finding a strange, violent peace in the dark. Their intimacy was a blood pact, a silent agreement that they were now bound by more than just a sister's life or a mother's debt. Later, as Amma lay against his chest, listening to the steady thud of a heart she had sewn back together, Min-ho's hand tangled in her braids. His voice was cold, lethal, and utterly devoted. "Chairman Park thinks he can hide behind his boardrooms and his bodyguards, but he forgot one thing. He stole from a woman who belongs to the ghost." He tilted her chin up, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "I promise you this, Amma. Before the sun sets on his empire, I will bring you the head of the man who made you want to jump from that bridge. I will give him his reputation, his hospital, and his life. He will bleed for every tear you shed on that railing." Amma didn't flinch. She leaned into him, the measured doctor replaced by the consigliere of the underworld. "Don't just kill him, Min-ho," she said, her almond eyes flashing with a new, dangerous brilliance. "I want him to watch while I take everything he ever loved. I want to be the last thing he sees before the dark takes him." Min-ho's lips curved into a dark, satisfied smile. The pact was sealed. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. The final surgery had lasted 14 hours. Amma's hands, steady as marble, had successfully rewoven Yuna's neural pathways using the perfected aethyl-red protein. As Yuna's vitals stabilized into a healthy, rhythmic hum, the clinical tension in the room broke. Yuna would live. But as Amma began the post-operative filing, she pulled a hidden encrypted subfile from the biometric drive Minho had retrieved from Director Choi's private safe. She expected to find more stolen data. Instead, she found a birth registry and a series of non-disclosure agreements dated 30 years ago. Her breath hitched. The blood types, the genetic markers used for Eunice compatibility, it all clicked with a sickening surgical precision. "You're late for the victory drink," Minho said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked stronger, his obsidian hair slicked back, his signature charcoal suit back in place. He held 2 crystal glasses of amber liquid. Amma didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the screen, her regal shoulders rigid. "Why didn't you tell me, Minho?" The air in the room chilled. "Tell you what, doctor?" Amma spun the monitor around. The screen displayed a side-by-side DNA comparison. On one side, Kang Min-ho, on the other, Chairman Park. The undeniable match, 99.9%. "The man who stole my life, the man who tried to kill Yuna, isn't just your enemy," she whispered, her chocolate-toned skin pale with shock. "He's the father who abandoned you. You didn't just want my research to save your sister. You wanted to use me to destroy your own blood." Minho's expression didn't flicker, but the glass in his hand shattered, the crystal shards biting into his palm. He didn't flinch. "He threw us away like medical waste, Amma. He left my mother to die in a slum while he built his empire on stolen ideas. He is a cancer, and you are the surgeon I hired to excise him." "I am a doctor, not an assassin," Amma shouted, her voice echoing off the sterile walls. "You used my trauma to fuel your patricide. You made me a partner in a blood feud I never signed up for." "I saved your life," Minho roared, crossing the room in 2 strides. He gripped her shoulders, his dark eyes predatory and desperate. "I gave you back your power. I gave you a throne. You gave me a cage with a better view." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the sirens of the Seoul Metropolitan Police began to wail. Minho's men had already started the systematic dismantling of Park's facilities. The chairman was being cornered. Minho pulled a sleek silver handgun from his waistband and pressed it into Amma's palm. The metal was cold, smelling of oil and finality. "The police are at Park's penthouse. My men have cut off his escape," Minho whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "He is waiting for the doctor to come and negotiate his surrender. You can walk in there and hand him over to the law, let him live in a comfortable cell, or you can finish the surgery. You can cut the cancer out for good." Amma looked at the gun, then at the man who had pulled her from the bridge. She looked at Yuna, sleeping peacefully because of her brilliance. She had to choose. If she killed Park, she became the monster the medical board claimed she was. If she spared him, she betrayed the man who had given her a reason to breathe again. Amma straightened her back, her box braids swaying with a heavy golden jingle. She adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, her almond eyes hardening into a resolve that was neither clinical nor criminal. It was something entirely new. "I'm going to the penthouse, Minho," she said, her voice a calm, terrifying velvet. "To do what?" he asked, his heart beating against her hand. Amma tucked the gun into the waistband of her black silk trousers and threw her white lab coat over her shoulders like a royal cape. "I'm going to show my father-in-law exactly what happens when you steal from a woman who has nothing left to lose," she said. "Stay here with your sister. This isn't mafia business anymore. This is a private consultation." As she walked out of the fortress, the ghost watched her go, realizing for the first time that he hadn't just saved a doctor. He had crowned a queen who was far more dangerous than he could ever be.